Good morning, Amy. How are you doing today?
I am super great, Alexis. How are you?
Good. We are moving into eclipse. Well, we're in eclipse season. So I have a feeling that's going to be our theme today. Is as we walk into eclipse season, what that means and what is all this action in Gemini, Sagittarius? What the heck? What the heck are we walking into? Um, yeah, we're recording today on May 7th. So I have a feeling, so the first eclipse is May 26th. So I have a feeling we're going to cover a good chunk of May, pretty much all of May, the
Hmm.
rest of May,
Yeah,
what's going on, and kind of walking us into that first eclipse.
that sounds excellent. We are definitely in energy that is asking us to transform and transmute and up level. And eclipses are what we're in on steroids or Red Bull or speed. It's just it's a hopped up energy, and that we're moving out of this like Taurus season, this very earthy, like the sun is shining. I'm looking forward to going out and just being outside today.
Yeah.
And the eclipse itself, this first one happens once the sun has moved into Gemini. So it's going to be, Gemini season,
Yes.
which is thought.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a totally different energy. And right, I think the piece to mention, because we'll go back through and kind of go
Hmm.
through the aspects starting most recently moving up to the eclipse. But I think it's worth talking about the eclipse and what it is, so that as we talk about things, you can start to make connections of this eclipse is the first eclipse on May 26th is a total lunar eclipse. So that means it's a full moon. So as Amy said, it's like a full moon on steroids, or use whichever analogy you'd like there. It's just that the volume is turned up. So we have a total lunar eclipse, and so we're in it, right? We're moving towards it. We are kind of in the window of
Hmm.
eclipse season. And the other piece to drop in is it's a south node eclipse, right? So as we talk, as we go through these aspects, like, it's a south node eclipse. And what that means is the south node is about what we're releasing, what we are need to let go of, and maybe painfully so, because often with the south node, it's what we know, it's comfortable, and we have this tight grip often around it. And sometimes it's what we came in with, like there may be ancestral or things literally in our DNA that we have. And so there's a big shedding as we move towards this first eclipse. So I think that's the piece to hold on that first eclipse, and we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end, but just to hold that, and we'll come back to it because I think all the aspects kind of tie in to this theme of the south node eclipse and the shedding.
Hmm. Yeah, there's. Are you getting a lot of feedback from me? Okay.
Just when you moved it, but you're good now.
All right. Um, Sorry about that. There's a real shedding of being able to look at our thought patterns, our behavioral patterns, our day-to-day moments that are creating the bigger picture of our lives. And are those day-to-day thought patterns, are those day-to-day moments creating the life we actually want to live? Um, because thoughts are energy, and energy just keeps moving. Energy just keeps going. And when we shift that, um, we can shift bigger things. We can move bigger things, because oftentimes it's our thoughts that tie us in to places we don't want to be. we get really super attached to things. Who has, in our last podcast with Amanda, we spent time talking about perception. And I know I have this week run into the like my own mental stories around perception.
Yeah.
And the dynamic of, for me, there's a deep internal story that I don't want people talking about me because I have a history and a story that when people talk about me, it has caused me emotional pain. That's just my perception though. Like I'm wanting to like control things I have zero control over. And the bottom line is the people that are talking about me, like I'm getting like really beautiful, amazing feedback. and and they're saying and they're talking about me, they're speaking about me with love and admiration. And it really bumped up hard against my story. So can I let that story go? Can I let the energy of perpetuating that thing go? South node, let it go, shed it, take that off, set it down and be like, I don't need to actually continue to carry that energy forward.
Yeah.
And that's what this south node piece is. And with everything, with Pluto being retrograde right now, Shariklo goes retrograde tomorrow. I know that there's a Saturn retrograde and a Mercury retrograde. And everything is really asking us to turn in and check ourselves. What are we carrying? What don't we need to be carrying? Can we move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset? Because we already can see, we saw in 2020, people, the fixed mindset is not working. Trying to solve problems using the same thinking that created the problems is not going to solve the problems.
Yeah. And to speak to that, to me, feels moving into the Gemini piece, right? So we have Mercury in Gemini. He just moved into Gemini recently. So we can feel that transition of moving from fixed Taurus into mutable Gemini. And Gemini, the beauty of Gemini and that kind of higher side of Gemini is to be the student, to take all the things in, to be curious, to kind of absorb all these different ways of thinking and be the student of it. The kind of shadow side can be almost getting swept away in the thoughts, right? And creating the story that actually is not helpful. Like, right, we can make up stories and kind of exaggerate things and go off on somewhere in our mind, right? We follow this like, well, if this happens, then it means this and this and this. And actually, it doesn't mean any of that. That can be the shadow of Gemini, because Gemini is very fast moving. It's very, there's an intelligence of the mind to it, right? It can connect the dots. It can, do these amazing things with the mind. But when you're getting swept away, especially if it's from an egoic place, that can be not so helpful. So I think the reminder with Gemini, one of the biggest things that I always come back to is curiosity. Like, can I be curious? Can I, yes, see all the pieces coming in? And maybe my mind does that little, like, I'm seeing like, that image of like like all the math symbols all over the chalkboard and like, connecting like some crazy equation. Like, yeah, maybe let your mind do that, but come back to what is the truth here? Like what, maybe I'm not right in this, and then often I know recently I've had, friends kind of be that mirror for me of like, okay, but is that really what's happening? And kind of taking that pause to just be curious more so. And we have tomorrow, so May 8th, we have Venus moving into Gemini. So we have Mercury in Gemini now, that just happened. And so tomorrow, May 8th, we have Venus also joining the, kind of those personal planets in Gemini. And then we'll have later in the month, the sun moving into Gemini. So we can start to feel with Mercury and Venus starting to move into Gemini, we can start to feel that transition. And it's a really great time to look at like, wow, what are all these thoughts like just literally popping out of the box of like, oh, right. Like knowing it's always been there, but it's almost like the lid is off and it's just like, whoa, my mind is really going to some crazy places.
Yeah, that Jack in the Box
Yeah.
image. Like it comes up and it's like, just in case you forgot about me. And it goes back in, just in case you forgot about me as it comes up and down. Um, as we do the energy of that unconscious belief, the small things that we say, the little comments that we make can be such beautiful markers when we can turn towards ourselves and actually listen to what we have to say
Yeah.
when we're speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just that same day, so tomorrow, just before Venus enters Gemini, she squares Jupiter. And Jupiter's about expanding. So right before she leaves Taurus, it's almost like this last message. Jupiter's like, okay, let's just take one more look at Venus if we feel into especially the like self-worth and the self-love and the love we have for self. It can be relationships too, so there may be, that kind of expansion. We can see it in our relationships because relationships are just great mediums for us to see what we need to see about ourselves, right? Because it's always about ourselves. And how we relate to people just helps us see what our beliefs are.
Mhm.
So it feels like there's a chance to really look at self-worth, and maybe going back to some of those Taurus themes around our body and our image and our values, and those things may be coming up as Venus kind of does her last little stint in Taurus before she moves into Gemini.
Yeah, there is I'm watching it happen with the people around me because that like relationship as a foil, and as a mirror, how as Jupiter and Venus come to this moment, how it's getting louder. People are really being pushed with what do you value? Where do your values lie? Does your value lie in your career? Does your value lie in how you relate to other people? Does your value lie in how you parent? And how, like, do you enjoy it? Do you not like it? Does it feed you? Is there a feedback loop that is nurturing and brings that Venusian like feeling to it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
what needs to shift if there is no Venusian that feeds me? Like, what do you need to shift? Because we have control over our lives.
Mhm.
And there's like boundaries are coming up. And that's just, there's, we've got Saturn, who is a player in everything this year with his, wandering through the sky with his rings and his boundaries. And my women's circle is working with an asteroid that has rings, like an asteroid that walks around with her own boundaries. I love it. So, where are your boundaries? And can you remember that the hierarchy of care is meeting your own needs so that you have something to offer?
Yeah.
You need to bring it in, and that's what all of these retrogrades are telling us. And that's what, for me, this is so like, oh, how am I meeting my needs? How am I tending myself so I can tend my relationships and the people around me and the things that I love and the things that feed me?
Yeah. Yes. And knowing Venus is going to take on a different flavor as she enters Gemini. So I think it's really important to go back to those, foundational pieces,
Mhm.
so that when she's moving through Gemini, it's a different flavor, right? It's faster pace. It's more of the mind. It's new things are going to come in around how we value ourselves and the love we have for ourselves. It's a whole different energy. So yeah, I think it's really clear and And it feels like we're going to need some extra grounding, some extra time in nature. I know I really felt this back in February when we had a lot of energy in Aquarius, because Aquarius is an air sign as well. And so I'm just feeling different. It's a different energy, but almost a similarity in the needing the grounding, like needing those foundational pieces, because Gemini is an air sign as well. And we can get really in our heads and kind of up here. And we need to remember, okay, breathe, come back down, especially into the heart,
Mm-hmm.
and rooting down like into the earth. So time in nature, like taking some Epsom salt baths, like really finding the things that root you. Because as we move through Gemini season, especially because there's an eclipse there, there's,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to get swept up uh, in that. Like you want to do as much as you can to be that strong. It's like I'm thinking if you have like a tree trunk, you have like a thick trunk, like that one is gonna hold up really well in a storm, rather than a skinny little, new tree with a tiny little trunk. It can get, blown over, cracked, broken, split. Right. So you want to have the stronger base, like that's what you want. And so that's kind of, an image of like, okay, what gives me that rooted, strong center, so that I can move forward through kind of the turbulence of Gemini. I know people who have a lot of Gemini in their charts, really love and embrace Gemini season, because it brings out their creativity. It brings out like this excitement for them. And it's almost like that hummingbird energy of like, there's an excitement, there's a fast moving, it's, we're here in this northern hemisphere in the spring, so you can feel everything coming to life. It's some of that energy. But for those who don't have a lot of Gemini, or who don't have a lot of air either in their charts, Gemini season can feel like just crazy, and all over the place, and a little fragmented.
Yeah, I was going to say broken.
Knowing where you're at, right? And knowing that it's okay. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay if, it just takes a little extra care to move through Gemini season. The next piece is on May 10th, we have Mercury conjunct the North Node in Gemini. So I feel like this is a preview for the North Node eclipse in June. Because we have on June 10th, we have a solar eclipse in Gemini. So that would be the North Node eclipse. That's the second eclipse in June. But we have Mercury forming a conjunction with the North Node. And he's very much involved in both eclipses. He goes retrograde after the first eclipse in May, but he's really involved in that second eclipse in June. He also rules Gemini. So Mercury is very at home in Gemini. He's like, okay, here's the time. Like, I'm going to get the messages out. They are going to be, straight to the point, and they might not get to you in a straight line, but that's at least the way he's delivering it. Like, he's happy. He's at home in Gemini. He can really work his magic, and he is the messenger. So he's like, yeah, I'm just going to shoot out these messages. Like, I got no problem with that. And that conjunction with the North Node feels important, of maybe dropping in some insights or some messages around what's to come in June, what's to come with that North Node. What are the pieces that you need to remember to bring you back to that soul alignment? Because the North Node to me is like that North Star, like where your soul wants to go. And so it feels like that May 10th Mercury conjunct the North Node is dropping in some pieces around that.
Yeah, the Mercury speaks all the languages. He is the great translator, and there is a call with this of how do we want to move forward in our communication? It feels like this Mercury conjunct North Node is asking us to really have awareness around the power of our words and the power of our languaging, and that we can be clear and we can be concise and we can be aligned, and it's going to bring us good things. And if we're confused or nebulous or cannot clearly and concisely offer this is it right here, I would like a cup of tea. I don't want a soda. I want a cup of tea versus saying I want something to drink. Like there's a big energy difference between I want something to drink and I would like a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Like it's finding that like north node, that's where I'm headed, and then using language and using communication and using that Mercury energy to be like, hey, there's your North Star. I'm just going to nudge you in that direction
Yeah.
because you're going to be creating the energy through your communication to bring you there,
Yeah.
to roll out the rug.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the rug is going to be flat or it's all going to be in one piece or.
Yeah, and what's coming is really the power in words. And not only the power in words, because I mean, that is true. Like the words we speak, they have potency. You know, it's like the words we speak are like a prayer, they are. And also our thoughts. So I think it's almost, you know, on that same wavelength of our thoughts are also, there's power in our thoughts. And so if we continue to be in the doubting or the uncertainty, or also not admitting that we want something, right? Like we can know we want something, but then we're just like, no, it's okay. Like I don't need that. Or, you know, I've been taught that like, no, it's okay. Like I'm good on my own, or I don't need that, or whatever it is, right? Whatever the message is, the more we think that, well, that's what the universe is going to deliver. The universe
Yeah.
will be like, okay, you know, taking like a relationship, for example, like having a soul desire for a relationship. But then on the like, either in your thoughts or your words, the way you express, you have this, no, it's okay. Like I'm good on my own. Like I can be independent. I don't need another person. And the more you tell yourself that, because there can be truth in, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm talking about like the soul desire, because of course our ego can be a little clingy, it can be a little needy, it can be like, I need a relationship for XYZ, and you know, not the healthy things.
Mm-hmm.
But even just feeling into, but I actually have a deeper desire for that too, right? And we're all the things, we're human, like we're never going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we think, no, I don't really need that thing, or no, it's never going to happen, well, that presents itself, right? Like that's how it's going to show up for you. And so remembering, I think, especially with this Mercury North Node piece of our thoughts, right? It's almost like getting our thoughts online, like getting our thoughts like on the track.
Yep.
Right? Like our soul wants this thing, and it's like, okay, well, like let's all get on the same team. Like thoughts, words, everybody, come on, we're gonna shoot for this.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can have like a heart desire and you can know it deeply, but then your thoughts are like, no, we're just gonna, yeah, we're just for what, and there's good reason for that, right? It's also,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to protect ourselves and to whatever, like it probably got you where you needed to get up to this point. But now it's like, okay, let's get everyone on track. Let's be on this, you know, all in the same path so we can move towards soul alignment, because that's what we actually want.
Mm-hmm.
And getting the mind on board feels like a piece, really, of the next, you know, month, but especially with this Mercury North Node piece.
Yeah. And that's beautiful, Alexis, because what I'm seeing and hearing and experiencing are those little moments where people speak their doubt out loud because it's easier for us to speak our doubts, to set ourselves up energetically to fail than it is to own our soul longings.
Because there's a vulnerability in it too. There's a
Mhm.
vulnerability in trusting those things we believe, but that may not be something we can tangibly see, right? Or like
Mhm.
there's not like a little contract we can like physically pull out and be like, see, I signed up for this thing. Like it's all in the unseen. Like there's takes this level of trust to be like, I feel this thing, I believe it, and I know it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a vulnerability in that. And there's, so especially in our thoughts and our words, because even with ourselves, right? Like we can talk
Oh
ourselves
yeah.
out of it, and with others of like, well, if I just say I'm okay, I don't have to show that maybe I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
because I also have been wrong in things I've felt. But I wouldn't even say wrong. I would just say they brought me exactly the healing and the peace, right? Like there's no wrong turns, there's no mistakes really. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, that thing that I really believed, I actually had to go through that so I could get to the next thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like the next up leveling of like, oh, this is where we're at now.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's vulnerability in that of being like, well, really, I believe this thing deeply, but then it showed up a little different than I expected, or it didn't look exactly how I wanted it to look. And that I think is that Gemini curiosity of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, it showed up in this way I wasn't expecting, but that's actually really beautiful and perfect, right?
It's amazing. And it is that it's almost like you and I talk a lot about the spirit guides and like kind of I call them my spirit posse. Like when I'm working, I'm like, spirit posse, assemble. And we joke a lot about how they must sit and laugh at our little human selves moving through this world, thinking we've got it under control, thinking we know what the plan is. And how often, I know in the years that we've known each other, you and I have both been like, I'm in, this is where I'm going. And we do all the stuff and we take all the steps and we put all the blocks in place and then we're like, and we're not. And and we're not, it turns out. Like it was about the lesson, just like you said, it was about the gift. It was about the healing, it was about the shift. And for me, it's about the deepening and trust.
In that process, like what I'm also seeing is like, I think so often we get so like culturally, we get so
Mhm.
stuck on like, oh, I'm at A, that's B, that's the goal. Like I gotta go. I can't give up on my goal. Like, but you miss, like it's actually a wavy path. It's like a zigzag. It's
Mhm.
actually like, no, you're gonna go over here and then go over here. And you're not even getting to B, you're actually gonna get to F or G or whatever, but you have to be on this zigzaggy way. And I think so often we get so attached to this. I don't know if it's, like pride, or it's what it is, or it's just, multiple things. And also culturally of, I said I'm going to do this thing, so I have to do it.
Mhm.
Because there's something in being able to shift and let go and being like, actually, that's not aligned for me anymore.
Mhm.
And being okay with other people may look at me and be like, oh, like,
She's a flake.
yeah, right. But knowing it's my deepest truth. So it doesn't matter what other people think, because it actually is going to get me somewhere even better, faster,
Mhm.
right? Than if I stay on this trajectory of A to B, like, oh, then I'm missing everything in between. So then I have to
Mhm.
take a whole nother long route to even get to C, when I could have just gone on the zigzag route to G, whatever.
Exactly. And that's perfect and that's so true is a huge part of our cultural conditioning is, I think about and I'm older than you. You graduate high school, you go to college, at which point as a woman you meet a man who is going to somehow like take care of you because we certainly weren't expected to take care of ourselves, at least not in my family of origin, because you're supposed to meet a man. That's why you go to college. At which point you get married and you have some kids and you live happily ever after. And when you're fed that that is the route, that's the road that you're going to take for success, it's a big, big leap for us to do anything different.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think that like brings us right into this new moon we have in Taurus on the 11th, because it's like, okay, and we're going to just do things radically different. And
Yeah,
it's a new moon really involving the dark feminine masculine, so it's conjunct Black Moon, who to me, it's Black Moon Lilith, but Black Moon to me is a conglomerate of all the dark goddesses, right? And at different times when it's aspected, different threads can light up. So in this particular case, it's also aspecting, the moon is also aspecting Lilith. So Lilith may be a thread that gets highlighted, but Black Moon to me is all the dark goddesses. It's Kali, it's Persephone, it's Medusa, right? It's all of them, Hecate. And so any of those can come up to kind of be the teacher of, to me, it's really the dark feminine is really, it's many things. But if I was just to feel into like, what's coming up of allowing the repressed, and if you're, feeling into all those cultural pieces, like allowing actually your truth to come out, like who really are you, regardless of what these outside things are taught. It's bringing up all these repressed pieces. And especially with the feminine, because whether you are male or female, we all have feminine energy. The feminine has been repressed for so long, then it kind of came out of the box of like a little distorted and like, well, we're just gonna, swing the pendulum the other way. But it's really feeling into those repressed bits, those repressed hidden pieces of self. And so with this new moon in Taurus, it's a new moon that swings the door open for the eclipse season. And it swings the door open, especially with Lilith. She's wild woman. She's like, I'm going to be who I am. Like, yes, I could have had this whole life in the Garden of Eden, and it could have been, nice and,
Good enough.
And
I could have been subservient to that man.
Yep. But she chose not to. She chose to leave, and it wasn't an easy path for her, but she was liberated. She was free. Like for her, there was no choice. There was no option to stay. And she's also conjunct Neptune. So Lilith and Neptune are together in Pisces for this new moon. So it feels like there's an extra touch of spirituality, and even with Neptune, there's an intuitive piece. So it may not be, and it may be, but it might not be the outward Lilith wild woman. It may be like the internal, right? Especially with new moon. New moons are generally very internal. So there's a chance to really ask the questions of like, oh, what are those pieces of me that want to come out? Because as long as you've been doing the work, there's always new, there's always more, there's always the next level. Like, oh, what is being asked of me to open even more, to express even more, to be myself even more? And it's also aspecting Pluto, who is the dark masculine side of that, right? So we have the dark feminine, and then we have the dark masculine, who also, he's like, I want all of you, right? Like, do not repress any parts of you. I want all of you, the good, the bad, whatever you think. To me, it's all beautiful. And so that's it's going to be a really interesting new moon. It's very heavy on the dark feminine, dark masculine, and it swings the door open for eclipse season. So there's just extra juice, extra potency there for that new moon.
For me, the between the new moon, the internal dark hidden of the new moon, and new moons are always sacred union because we have a new moon when the sun and the moon are conjunct. Then throw in the dark masculine energy and the dark feminine energy. It's about self-intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I mean like the self-knowing, the being willing to look at our own sticky parts, our own parts that we keep hidden, because it is about bringing them to ourselves first, before we can start to move them out into the world. It's can we really bring it to ourselves? Can we love that part? Can we be like, holy buckets, I am having a meltdown right now because, my little 10-year-old self, my little 2-year-old self, can we bring that in and be like, ooh, I am messy right now, and I love me and I trust me, and I know I can manage this even when I'm messy.
Yeah, and that's that dark feminine as well, the fierce love.
Yeah.
Like, loving yourself no matter what, and loving all the parts. Yeah, and that same day, there is also Mars is aspecting Uranus. So Mars sextile Uranus which feels very activating. Like as if that wasn't enough to have this dark feminine energy, like this feminine roar almost, and then to have Pluto, there as well. We also have Mars and Uranus that day in an aspect, which Mars is very activating. He's like that spark, he's the warrior. And Uranus is the lightning bolt, the electric, like radically new. So you feel into all of that. And that is one interesting little cauldron of a new moon. Like there's a lot going on there. I'll also drop in, I am doing a new moon ceremony. So if you're interested and you listen to this in time, on May 11th, I am holding a new moon circle. So you can go to my website to find out more about that. But it's a very potent energy on top of opening the door for eclipse season, right? And I think the ask there is like, what are the things that really need to be expressed for you? And they could be things that you've been working on for a long time, and it's just like, we're now at the next layer.
Yeah.
Or it may be new parts of yourself that you're like, oh, I didn't even know about that one. But either way, like feeling into all of that, and then you get the activation of Mars and Uranus, like, whoa, you're not going to have to, it feels like you're not going to have to do too much, right? Like it's going to be pretty loud of what are the pieces that you need to see. It's just, to me, it's more like being in that listening space, making the space and saying yes, so that it all can, come in, because we also have the choice to ignore and to fight it.
Yep.
And that is the struggle that we create. So to me, it feels like just making space and right.
And with this, we talked about it in our last pod. Mars is in Cancer, that taking off of the armor and the warrior spirit it takes to move from the heart, the strength it takes to be vulnerable. Vulnerability and surrender are about strength, our internal resilience. And layered into all of this, Mars being very uncomfortable in Cancer because he's got to take off his armor, he's also out of bounds. And I think that can result in some like sideways, oh, I'm super scared of what my heart, how big my heart can get, how much my heart can feel. We have this idea that there are good emotions and there are bad emotions, rather than the fact that emotions are messengers. And you know what? We may get an email that makes us uncomfortable. We may get an email that challenges us. That's a message. Most often when we're challenged, that's a moment for us to sit back and really breathe into our heart. When we come up against something that challenges us, that pushes us, that triggers the fight, flight, freeze, that is the time to sit back and breathe and open up and soften that heart. Because to me, that's when we're being asked to move into deeper intimacy with ourselves. Why does this scare me? Why is this activating me? Why am I angry about this? Like, is that person making that decision even going to affect me in any way, shape, manner, or form?
Yeah. And I love that imagery of the armor, because I've been using that as like a visual of taking off the armor, right? And exposing the heart. And it's super vulnerable. But it also, when you do that, it invites others around you to take their armor off because you're not armored, right? Yeah. So it's an invitation of, I am taking my armor off, and I might put it back on. I'm not saying, that I won't, but when you do that, it invites those around you to also at least think about, they might not take off their armor, but at least think about it. And I've been using the visual of like actually imagining myself taking off this armor and exposing the heart, right? And so that might be a visual to just feel into, like, what does that do for you when you kind of, drop into that heart space and take off the armor. Another thing I've been really loving is this 3 breaths. So I've been listening to Megan Watterson, who I love. She is the author of Mary Magdalene Revealed. And she talks often about these 3 breaths. And I've been using it, and it's dynamite. It's really, really great. It's a very fast way to drop in. You take a first intentional breath and you bring yourself into your heart space. And you take a second intentional breath, and that is aligning you with soul. And then you take a third intentional breath, and that's coming back, right? Because you can stay in the first 2, right? You can stay in the first 2 and then kind of be in meditative space. But then when you take that third breath, it's coming back into reality from that soul aligned place. And so it only takes 3 breaths, because you can do it all in just, like all 3 breaths and okay, I'm just going to go walk off and live my life. Or you can use it as a meditation. But I've been really loving it, of like, it's just 3 breaths and it brings you in really deep. And so I think feeling into both of those, just, using that practice of going into the heart, of calling on that soul alignment, and then using that image of taking the armor off. Like, what does that
Mhm.
do? Just that practice
Yeah,
itself, I feel like, is really big. And you can do that every day. Like, you can do that when you wake up, you can do that when you go to bed. And I think that can really shift things.
that's beautiful. And, just for everyone to imagine, what would the world look like if we all moved from heart? As a mom, I spend a lot of time with my kid, and he spends a lot of time explaining to me how his little world that he has created works. And it is a consistent challenge for me to move out of a fixed mindset of well, he's talking about this thing, and that's not how we do it. And when we move out of a fixed mindset, it requires us to do those 3 breaths, to open up the heart and to bring in that Gemini energy of getting curious. Like, this 10-year-old probably has some ideas that could be really functional, because most children do. So, can we breathe? Can we use a heart breath and recognize where we are falling into places that say, oh, that's not going to work? And the second oh, that's not going to work comes up, like, that 3 breath practice sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Like, that's the point, to bring that in. When we hear ourselves deciding before we even try, before we even explore it, that's not going to work. There is a marker right there. That is a piece of our fixed mindset. And can we bring some breath, and can we bring some heart to that?
Yep.
Beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. So good. And then we have May 13th, Jupiter moves into Pisces. So this is pretty big, because Jupiter has been in Aquarius for the whole year, and he'll come back into Aquarius. So he will finish up 2021 in Aquarius. And that is kind of the area of the chart that he is expanding for all of 2021. But he dips into Pisces through the end of July. So May 13th through the end of July, Jupiter will be in Pisces. And that is bringing expansion to that area, Pisces. So you can feel into, it's almost like a preview of what's to come for next year, because next year Jupiter will move more solidly into Pisces. And so if you're familiar with your chart, you can look at what house is Pisces for you. What planets do you have there? If you have Jupiter in Pisces, you're going to be coming up on a Jupiter return. So you may get a preview, May through July, of what that brings. And so you can just feel into, what does that mean for Jupiter to move into Pisces? And you might have no idea, but you'll most likely get a preview May through July of what that means, and what area of your life wants to be expanded with Pisces. And it also just brings in this intuitive, this different way of walking through the world. There's also, Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. So there's a letting go, there's a surrender to it. Like, it's pretty phenomenal that Jupiter moves into Pisces, which is a sign of surrender, as we're moving into these next 2 eclipses. It's like,
You can't make it up.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's so
great.
perfect.
Yeah. Mhm.
As it is so perfect, we're it's time for us to surrender what doesn't work.
Yep.
What is not, you and I have spent all year so far talking about like how big things feel. And whether we've done it here on the podcast or whether we've done it in our conversations or the programs that we run, everything has been feeling so big. And it feels more like if we can just bring our energy, if we can bring our vibration up, like this is the new normal.
Yeah.
It's so big. That's our new energetic frequency that we're being called to answer. Can we answer that energetic frequency? Can we move from a place of heart and compassion and soul alignment? Because what is soul aligned for one is soul aligned for all.
Mhm.
And when we can up our game, up our little human game to the new cosmic vibration that is calling us, like people hear it, people feel it. Had a beautiful session with a client. She's like, I don't know what's going on. My bones are vibrating. And I'm like, welcome to the new world. Because we can feel it when we are soft and quiet and surrendered and taking those breaths. When we are Mars and Cancer, taking off the armor. When we're Jupiter hanging out with Venus and we're in the sensation of life, I don't know how anybody can miss the upgrade that is calling us. It's inviting us. It's it's overdue.
Yeah, and that day, so the day that Jupiter moves into Pisces, the sun aspects Neptune. So sun sextile Neptune, which feels like just a more illumination in that whole idea of the intuitive and the Neptune is also high spirit, like he's high spiritual love on that level. Like it's not the human love, it's like the soul kind of love.
Mhm.
And to have that happen on the day that Jupiter moves into Pisces just feels like extra energy in that area of, and because Neptune is in Pisces, um, and he rules Pisces, so it's there's a lot of that energy that day, and being open to that. Like we all have intuitive gifts. We all have this ability to know on a deeper level in alignment with our soul, and so it's especially just feeling into that day. There's a I'm trying to feel for the word because I mean it's not activation necessarily. It's because there's a surrendering
I
feeling
was
to
gonna
it.
say it's a blossoming to me.
Yeah, blossoming would be
It's
a good word. It's because there's a surrendering in it. Like there's not
Mhm.
anything we can do. It's just being in this like deep trust of it, and believing it,
Mhm.
believing really deeply, um, these kind of deeper knowings
Yeah.
within ourselves that maybe we've been having for a long time, especially this year. There may be things, especially as Jupiter was expanding Aquarius and the new and the revolutionary, what wants to happen this year. As he moves into Pisces, it's like, okay, and now it's time to believe it. Now
Mhm.
it's time to surrender into it and actually trust that what you want wants you.
Exactly. And what we want on a soul level does want us. It's what the fine print in the contract that we can't pull out and read is. Because it's trusting our contract and working in that and dancing with the unknown. Like I've said before and I'm going to say it again. Trust is a relationship with the unknown. And that's what we're being called into. can we trust? And it's trusting ourselves that we can step in, like we spoke about earlier, that we can be like, oh, I'm going to go that way. And we can trust ourselves enough to go that way. And when we get the lesson, when we get the healing, when we get what we need off of there, and the message is then, and now go this way, that we can trust ourselves enough to let go, to surrender what we were like, but I thought, why, what happened to, huh? You know, we go through that death and that ego piece of, well, but we had a thing going in that direction. And now I'm supposed to like make a 120-degree turn and go another direction. What the? And that, like, I love Neptune. He's my dude. He's my man. Um, and there is that higher, like the picture I keep getting is the lotus coming out of the mud, and how when you watch flowers open in like a time lapse photography, it looks like they're falling. Like it looks like they just open and fall into place. And there is that like feel to this, the blossoming, and not the slow blossoming that our little human eyes can perceive, the blossoming that the like soul can see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that it like falls into place, like trusting that everything you're going through is so that things fall into place, right? And we go through cycles, so it might be multiple, you know, there might be multiple lotus flowers blossoming, but trusting that it will fall into place. Because I think when we're in it, when we're in the mud, when we're in that, we're like, what did I sign up for? Why this can't be right? No way. But trusting that it will fall into place, because we also can't control that. Like if we tried to blossom a flower, we would mess it all up. Like it would just be not a flower anymore. Right? If we were like, okay, and this needs to happen and this one needs to move, so that like we cannot control that. You can't. So there's a surrendering in it and a trusting that it will fall into place. The lotus knows what it's doing. It will fall into place exactly as it's meant to. And yeah, I love that, because that feels very much what this energy of this Pisces, Jupiter in Pisces, is going to be for those few months, right? He's going to have a few months to be like, and trust, right? And so I'm sure we'll come up against many things. But as we move into eclipse season, like eclipses have the potential to really shift things in our lives.
Yeah.
So the more we can fall into that surrender and trust place, right, the more that can shift. And then we're moving into the sun in Gemini on May 20th. So that's when we kind of, everyone's kind of in Gemini who's going to be there. And we're in Gemini season on the 20th. So, and it feels like there's a blossoming in that. Like there's a blossoming in being in Gemini season. Yeah.
Amazing. I love it. There's so much happening, and the piece to remember with the lotus flower falling into place is when we allow things to when we surrender and accept and soften and work from heart.
And get our mind out of the way. Because I think that's the Gemini, the shadow of Gemini, right? The mind can be like, no way. And the mind can get in the way. For sure.
That lotus flower, not only is it going to rise from the mud and fall open exactly perfectly, it's going to fall away and sink back into the mud to create nourishment perfectly. What is going to fall away when we allow, rather than our little, I know, I've got this, I'm not going to believe, I'm not going to trust, I'm going to micromanage the hell out of the universe. The lotus flower, like, it knows. Nature knows.
Yeah, and getting the little human, like, you know, to be humble and that it doesn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can have, thoughts and beliefs and things, but also coming back to that humble place of, but I really, in the grand scheme of things, I don't know exactly how this is going to work. I don't know exactly how this is going to, um, you know, how
Yeah.
this is going to work out. And then we have on May 23rd, Saturn retrograde. So that's right before the eclipse. It's 3 days before that first eclipse. We have Saturn going retrograde, which I think is significant in knowing the placement of Saturn this year. Saturn is squaring Uranus for the whole year. And we're moving into the second square of Saturn and Uranus. The first square happened in February. The second square, when they go exact, is in June. And they're in that loose aspect for the whole year. But Saturn now goes retrograde. So it's one of those moments when we have these longer aspects. There's times when it gets highlighted, right? So this is one of those times when Saturn's like, okay, and now I'm going to kind of grab your attention and we're going to go in to look at all the old stuff, all the old foundational pieces that we need to really like take a look at here. But right before we move into that eclipse, right before we move into the South Node eclipse. So that's May 23rd. And he's also aspecting the North Node, aspecting Chiron, who's the wounded healer, as he goes retrograde. So there's both that looking at our wounds and holding that for soul alignment, right? Like holding, because he's aspecting the node. So there's like right before the eclipse, he's doing this.
Yeah, I love me some Saturn. And noting you said that some of these aspects can feel long, like this year-long Saturn Uranus square that we're in. Started in February, goes through December. Like there's an invitation to keep in mind for everybody out there that these long aspects can be seen in your chart, and they're about stamina building. They're individual pieces. That first square was let me show you. This approaching square that's happening with Saturn turning retrograde is now like, let's go inside and have a real good long look at why and what is going on that is creating this thing that you saw back in February. So that come December, you can have a plan and you can implement it to create change.
Right.
So,
And be able to come to that completion point by December when they hit their third square. And so that's just something to keep in mind, that we have Saturn there going retrograde, right? Because there's also going to be Mercury retrograde on May 29th, kind of sandwiching the eclipse. So the eclipse is on May 26th. So we have the sandwich of Saturn retrograde and Mercury retrograde, and they're really asking us to go within and to kind of reflect and evaluate the things we need to see. So Saturn is one piece of it, and then the other side we have Mercury, who's our thoughts, who he's going to be a big player in that North Node eclipse in June. But feeling into that first eclipse, the lunar eclipse in Sag, it's at 5 degrees of Sagittarius. So you can look in your chart, see what's going on around 5 degrees of Sagittarius. And we mentioned it's a South Node eclipse, so there's this releasing. So we really have both Saturn and Mercury being like, I got you. We're going to look at exactly what we need to release. Again, I feel this with eclipses, but especially because of the energy of this one, we're not going to have to do much, right? It's just listen, just be open, listen, because the energy is there. We just have to be open to it and be willing to see it, right? Is kind of step one. But it is interesting to feel into Saturn and Mercury kind of sandwiching this eclipse. And Sagittarius is one of the shadow sides of Sagittarius, can be kind of that know-it-all energy. So be like really catching yourself when you think something is true or real, or you can't let go of it because of some story of what you think. Being really careful of that, because the illuminated side of Sagittarius is this optimism, this ability to see from this like philosopher, standpoint. But it takes being careful when you have the South Node there, especially. It's working through some of that shadowy
Mhm.
stuff around Sagittarius.
Yeah. And we've got this retrograde sandwich happening with Mercury and Saturn. And Pluto retrogrades like the plate, right? There's this whole retrograde structure holding this time of going in, shedding, transforming. What are we going to let go of? Um because that's what growth is. We can't grow if things don't shed away. Think about a snake shedding its skin. We need to let go to move forward. And that shadowy aspect of Sagittarius, it's not just well, I read once in a book or I read an article. It's not just that level of knowing. It's even taking it one step further, that, well, historically, this person has always been this way. So I need to be this way to match it. You know what? Let that shit go. Be right now. Bring your unarmored heart. Bring your 3 breaths. Megan and your beautiful Mary Magdalene practice. Bring your 3 breaths. Be right now, because when we enter an interaction with anybody thinking that we know how it's going to go, that's that messy Sagittarius aspect. And what it does is it limits the other person, but more than that, it limits our own soul expression. It limits our ability to be in the moment, to be soul aligned, to be in our passion, to speak our truth, to be right here, right now, rather than in what can be the depressive thoughts of the past or the anxiety of the future. Because that's really what depression and anxiety are. Depression is holding on to past stuff and bringing it into the moment. Anxiety is worrying about what's coming and bringing that into the moment. And when we're just in the moment, when we soften, and it doesn't matter how the other person, what they do, that's about them. Being in alignment, being in integrity, being an integrated body that actually has a soul living in it, that's about you. That's about each of us showing up in our best. And that's what came up when you were talking about like that Sagittarius self-righteousness. How often I hear people say, well, I'm going to be like that because this other person is always like that. Well, where are you going to get in the world? Because what are the chances that the other person is sitting someplace saying, well, I'm going to be like this because the other person's always like that? What could happen if you show up different?
World of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to go back, I think like the kind of take homes are this new moon on the 11th is a really big door opener, right? So that's the first piece. Like we got to get through that before we even know what's on the other side. So that's, the first piece. The second big piece feels like this Jupiter moving into Pisces and this surrender and this trust of the things will fall into place. And then we have the eclipse on May 26th, which is the full moon eclipse, the total lunar eclipse. And it feels like we're not even going to know, like we're already in it. So you probably do know on some level the things that are needing to shed now, but also knowing things can radically shift by the end of May. Like we're going to be in a whole different place. And so just feeling into, for whatever reason, it felt helpful to kind of bring in these kind of, bigger moments of the new moon feels really big and it's moving us into this lunar eclipse. And I think that's part of it too, of like, we don't even know what it's going to be like the end of May. Like so much can change, so much can shift. But it's really just being in that trust place with
Mhm.
it. And when the anxiety comes and when the doubts come, having a practice, like, and thinking about it now, so that as we move through the month, it's something you can go to, of what is the thing that brings me right. And you can have things like, okay, well, it's nature, or it's doing some yoga, like those are one level, but also what are the like instant things you can do, whether it's having a spirit animal, or having the breath practice, or something that you can instantly think of or go to, that kind of brings you back into that heart soul aligned place, because it's going to be a very busy month. It's going to be very fast moving. We can't even imagine what the end of the month is going to look like, because so much is going to shift. So yeah, I feel like that's just what I wanted to like.
That's amazing. I love it because we are in it, and I think we need to drop in just another little invitation to your new moon piece on May 11th for those that are listening to this before that. It's going to be super exciting and super wonderful. Alexis is an amazing, amazing guide. I have I'm facilitating a women's circle that we are working with Charlie this month. So there's still time to get in on that. And then I've got my elemental retreat, like big transformation, fire walk, whole gig in August. So both Alexis's website and mine are in the show notes. And yeah,
Love it.
until next time.